Thank you. Moving on, I'm going to invite Matthew Trindall up to the stage. So Matthew Trindall, the Aboriginal Mental Health Director, New South Wales Health, is going to talk about the cultural determinants of Aboriginal mental health and wellbeing. So welcome, Matthew. Matthew Gulmaroi Murray, with family connections to the Thangati, Gandangara and Bigabul people. Matthew is Director of Aboriginal Mental Health Branch of the New South Wales Ministry of Health. He's previously held positions with Justice Health and Forensic Mental Health Network as the Director of Aboriginal Strategy and Culture. He's a clinical leader of Aboriginal mental health, South Eastern Sydney Local Health District, and rural mental health with Hunter New England Local Health District. So I've been around, so thank you. Welcome. Do you want that one or this one?
I'll happy with this.
This one? I don't think you've got the problem of this thing being in the way. But
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I feel like this is a bit of my story now. So just to hear back some of the diversity and some of the stuff that I've been through, it's good to know that you got these forums, but also just recognising the work that's in this room today, which is great. So no need for introductions for myself because those have already happened, but I'd firstly just like to acknowledge country and also pay respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge everyone here today, and especially those with a lived experience. And in particular, if any Aboriginal colleagues are here today or online as well. So I just want to give a shout out to Lizzie Stageman. She's done some artwork for us last year. So she commissioned this piece of artwork called You're Not Alone. And we had an official launch last year as part of those proceedings. And it's about the story of those with a lived experience, and in particular their journey. So it talks about being a warrior, but also recognises our distinct communities and also the diversity that exists across our Aboriginal nation. So I just want to acknowledge the work that she's done, and in particular about putting this piece of work together. And the good thing about it, the most exciting part, is that we're getting some attire that's going like hotcakes at the moment. So I've heard a lot today about the social determinants of health. I thought I'd bring a different lens to it today. I think it's something that needs to be considered when we talk about mental health, but in particular around the cultural determinants and how that actually impacts on Aboriginal people, but also us as service providers and sort of that vision of improving health systems, but in particular around what it looks like for a policy level. So I'm going to talk about a couple of key things when it comes to our priorities across New South Wales Health, and in particular from a policy level, but also what it looks like for an Aboriginal community member, particularly accessing services, and also around getting our systems and structures in place to support our communities. So I'm not sure how many times I've been asked this, what's your vision? It's an interesting one. I feel like I'm in a job interview over and over again around what can you bring to this role and what can you do as a service provider. But I think one of the big vision statements that I like to think that is Aboriginal health is everyone's business. And I think that everyone here today should buy into that mentality, because for those with a lived experience know that they can't do it on their own. They require everyone in the room to work together. And in particular, if you want to really close the gap when it comes to Aboriginal mental health, we actually need to do it all together, because if relying on 3% of the population to do 97% of the work, I'm not a mathematician or a scientist or a researcher, but I know those statistics don't work out very well. So I think it's something that it should be everyone's business. And I think as a collective here today, if you're going to make a vision around improving Aboriginal mental health, and in particular community members, I think it comes with those people sitting in this room today. So that's your homework and that's your challenge. From being a very nice map, I think this is something that comes back from an earlier conversation. I think it came up on the panel and Tricia mentioned it, about one size not fitting all. And this is a very good reason why it doesn't, because if you look at the distinct communities that exist across our nations, it just shows you the diversity of Aboriginal communities across Australia. So looking at it from a policy or strategic lens, there's so much diversity, which means that one size does not fit all for our communities. Like, I'm a Gomeroi man, but I've also got connections to the Dunghutti, Gandangara, and also the Bigabul people. They're all distinct communities. They all have their own languages. They all have their community protocols, and in particular, community politics. So it's something that we need to get right, and that's why it needs to be everyone's business when I talk about Aboriginal mental health from a policy level. I'm not going to go into details about this, but I think context is always very important when we talk about Aboriginal communities and also around Aboriginal mental health. We know that pre-colonisation, there was in the distinct communities across Australia. who have different cultural connections, diversity, stories, lines, dreamings, language, and also stories. So I think this is something that we do need to recognise, and this comes back to the lived experience. So this is a lived experience of my communities, it's the lived experience as an Aboriginal person, and we do need to provide context around this, why it's very important. So not even talking about colonisation, we're also talking about the consequences that come from that. So if we're talking about consequences, then we're also talking about issues that occurred for our communities over a long period of time. And this isn't to look at the deficit discourse, it's about the reality of our communities and what they've gone through, and in particular legacy around the deficit discourse that plagues our communities, but also the challenges that are experienced on both mental health and physical health. So if we want to look at outcomes, we like to do a good outcome measure, KPIs, etc. This is what it looks like for our community members. We talk about the prevalence of mental health conditions and in particular physical health, comorbidity. This is what it looks like for our Aboriginal community members. The fact that we've got suicide as a fifth leading cause of death for Aboriginal community members is disgraceful, to be honest. To think that how overrepresented they are from a physical health, to put that into context is why we need to make it everyone's business. It's not about just from a policy level or some individual service or the community resolving this. This is actually going to have to take a collective effort from all pieces of work, but in particular across all organisations. As I said, you're not going to rely on your Aboriginal mental health workforce to resolve all issues that are happening in Aboriginal mental health, because it's too much. Let's be realistic about it. So this is why we have these policy frameworks in place. So as the Director for Aboriginal Mental Health, one of my responsibilities is overseeing the strategic 5-year plan that we do have in place. This is the third iteration of it. It's been around for a while. There's a big gap between the last version of it, but also COVID did derail its launch, but it's also being very ambitious about what we're actually committing to. So from a policy level, our vision is for all Aboriginal people across New South Wales to have access to culturally safe and holistic healthcare. Is that achievable? I'd like to think so. As a bureaucrat, I have to say that as well. But realistically as well, we've got goals in place. Like I said, this isn't going to be a short-term journey. This is going to be a long-term journey in terms of us getting it right. Like I said, having some strategic context to what we're doing actually means that we hopefully can get it right in the next 5 years. I hope everyone in this room knows what the Closing the Gap strategy is, in particular what it looks like from a national and state level. These are the 5 domains which are being measured when it comes to health and in particular mental health. So I'm not going to go through these. These are very ambitious targets, but I'm always of the belief that you've got to set the bar very high, because it does challenge that narrative around that deficit discourse that Aboriginal people can't manage what's going on from a community level, and in particular around supporting the services that they provide. So this is something around being very ambitious and having some very high level targets. They're going to be challenging. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but the idea is that it's addressing some of the stuff, and it goes back to that co-design and Aboriginal-led decision-making framework around supporting communities and also the work that they're doing on the ground as well. So that image is of the peak Aboriginal organisations across New South Wales. They're a part of our governance framework for New South Wales mental health and in particular Closing the Gap. So as you can see, you've got 8 Aboriginal community controlled organisations which are known as CAPO, the Coalition of Aboriginal People Organisations. They're a part of the whole implementation for Closing the Gap across New South Wales. I have responsibility for Target 14 around significant and sustained reduction in suicide within the Aboriginal community towards 0. This is a target, as I mentioned, it can be very challenging, it's very ambitious, but we've got to start somewhere because, like I said, if suicide is the 5th leading cause of death, then we actually need to invest in what's going on. So we do have a number of initiatives that are happening when it comes to this particular target. So we've got models of care work around developing Aboriginal cultural models of care, and that's done across the local health districts, specialty health networks, and also the AMS sector. We've also got Building on Aboriginal Community Resilience initiative. So we fund 25 services across the state of New South Wales to deliver suicide prevention activities in their own communities, developed by a community for community. So at least those conversations and the words and the language that I'm using today is actually reflected in what's going on as part of closing the gap, which is a good starting point for us. So that is the social and emotional wellbeing domains there. So like I said, today I'm going to talk about culture and health and why it is important. And we'll go back to that image that was at the start around the diversity around the different Aboriginal nations across Australia. As I mentioned, we've talked a lot about social determinants. Today I'm here to talk about cultural determinants and why it's very important. So talking about being equally well, I'd like to see our communities being culturally well. So if that's a nice paradigm shift around supporting the communities, and I think this is where we need to lead around the work that needs to happen in our sector around mental health and supporting our communities. So connection to country, we know that. Like I'm off country at the moment. There's a bio around what countries I'm connected to. So I get homesick a lot. Like I said, I long for country. I like going back there, visiting family and coming back because it's 45 degrees out in Narrabri sometimes. But the idea is that I need to go back home and connect with country, connect with family, connect with language and community. Cultural beliefs and knowledge. Like I said, there's over 300 different language groups around Australia. Each have their own unique story, their own dialects. And language, very important, like I said, that's a big cultural shift around revitalising the language groups across Australia and the work that we're doing to support that. These other ones are no-brainers, like I said, family, kinship and community, cultural expression and continuing culture. That is probably one of the biggest key factors that drives Aboriginal mental health at the moment around having a trauma-informed lens and recognising the work that's happened in around revitalising culture and language, but also around my parents' generation who weren't able to practice culture because of previous assimilation policy, etc. That's not very long ago. So my father didn't have the opportunity to learn his language, learn his cultural activities, go out on country, do men's business, because they'd be taken away by the welfare. My dad isn't old, he's only 62. So this isn't talking about the 1800s, we're talking about the 1970s and 1960s when this is going on. Same thing with my grandfather. He had to get a dog tag to leave his community and go into town without having permission. He got that exemption in 1960. It's not very long ago. I said it's in a lot of people's generation sitting in this room today. So traditional healing and medicine, working in two worlds. If I'm running out of time, please push me along because I just like chatting. No disrespect to any Chinese medicine practitioners in the room today. I just wanted to use this as an example and you'll understand where I'm coming from at this point. So Chinese medicine practitioners are regulated by APRA in Australia. Yes, as a lot of other industries are regulated throughout Australia. The reason that I'm getting to this point is that those 300 different communities I mentioned earlier have been practicing culture for 60,000 years. We've got traditional healers and medicine occurring in Australia for over 60,000 years, but aren't recognised in delivering of services throughout Australia. It took a French researcher to come out here in 2008 by the name of Dr. Panzanini to actually study traditional healing in Australia to get it recognised and actually incorporate into the systems and service provisions for health and mental health. So 2 French researchers came out to Australia to do that in 2008. So that shows you where we are. But on the other side, we've got Chinese medicine, which is APRA registered, and you can practice in Australia as a practitioner. But we've got traditional healers who do medicine, cultural activities for 60,000 years, have no regulation or regulatory body in place. So I just want to give a shout out to the Nunkeries and all those people who have been advocating for this work that's going on. But the reason I'm bringing this back is if we're actually going to address these things and looking at the cultural determinants, then we actually need people who have been doing it for thousands of years to be a part of the solution. And not only just for everyone in the room today, the traditional healers that have been in place, doing a lot of work side by side with mainstream services in South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, etc., need to have a better say in what we do as part of our service provision when it comes to Aboriginal mental health. And the reason I say that is because these are some of our prescribed tools that most people would know. So if you work as a frontline clinician, this is your bread and butter, peas and carrots, whichever acronym you use. But the idea is that one size does not fit all for this when we talk about Aboriginal people. And this is what our tools are that our Aboriginal mental health clinicians get every day to assess an Aboriginal person when they come through the doors in mental health service. And the reason I say this is that those who are familiar with these assessment tools has no indications around how to measure culture as part of that process. Presenting problem, what's the symptoms? So this is why it's very important to recognise and look at what work's actually going on around further research, developing the evidence when it comes to culturally validated tools that we can use that are more appropriate for assessing culture and the impacts of culture on the mental health conditions of people in the community that are Aboriginal. So this is a shout out to Dr. Tracy Westerman. She's been leading a lot of this work. For those who are familiar with her, she's done a lot of research as being an academic but also a clinician for a long period of time around improving our systems but also improving our structures to make sure that they're more culturally appropriate when it comes to assessing our community members. And the reason for that, and this is old literature, it has had various iterations of it as well, but the idea around recognising cultural bound syndromes and the importance of that when it comes to Aboriginal communities. So First Nations communities around the world have a lot of cultural syndromes that are impacted on their presentations, which might be nuanced with other mental health conditions. But Tracy Westerman is one of the lead researchers when it comes to this work in Australia. As part of her research, she was actually able to validate the importance of different disorders that are localised in communities, which might be get misdiagnosed as a mental health condition in Australia. So longing for country, story cuts, and being sung. So three distinct new syndromes that are particular to Aboriginal community members across Australia. And this research has been going for a while, but she's leading a lot of the work when it comes to assessing and validating a lot of cultural assessment tools when it comes to mental health. Why is that important? Because if you're a mental health clinician, as an example, and you're going to present as an acutely unwell person at an emergency department, and they pull out their MOAT form and start assessing you, asking you all these wonderful questions when you're distressed, you might get listed as having an affective disorder or psychosis or self-harming behaviour. But for an Aboriginal person, that presentation might be a lot different because they might be longing for country, which might have some nuances between mental health condition as a diagnostic tool, but also how it relates to their culture as well. So this is why it's very important to understand that working in two worlds is very important to addressing Aboriginal mental health, because it goes back to those addressing those issues around cultural nuances across all the communities, taking on board the trauma-informed lens and also acknowledging the historical context of Aboriginal community members and what they've actually been through over the last 250 years. So this is why it's very important that we lead a lot of work in this space. Because if we're going to get it right around closing the gap and addressing all these ongoing challenges that are experienced by Aboriginal people, then we need to make sure our models and our systems and our assessments are culturally safe for our community members when they do present to our services. So I'm just going to finish on that, because like I said, it's very important around understanding the distinct communities that do exist across Australia, and in particular them being a unique and individual one and what they represent as part of their own culture. So if we are going to close the gap, then we need to build the evidence, which is clear. That's why a lot of people in here are researchers and love talking at these types of forums, because they get to promote all the good work that's going on. As I mentioned, improving our systems. Like I said, we've got a whole workforce out there that are traditionally trained, have been around for thousands of years, that operate on a daily basis in their community, but aren't embedded in how we do systems and services in mainstream sectors. Like I said, utilising traditional healers, looking at traditional medicine as a form of treatment. Just like Chinese medicine is incorporated and regulated and operational in Australia, we need to get to that point as well at some time. The other thing is around developing those culturally validated assessment tools. Very important, like I said, the square peg in a round hole doesn't work. We know that. So we need a new system. We need to understand what's not working well, and this is one way of doing that. And the final point is around looking at the cultural determinants and looking at the ways we do things differently. So that's a snapshot around where we are at the moment, what the landscape looks like for our communities, but also around some solutions moving forward. And like I said, there's some homework for everyone today that make it everyone's business and go home and research all those wonderful communities across Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Great talk. Have we got time for a few questions? Up the back there, do you want... People online, just get you... Excuse me.
Hi, Matt. College of Mental Health Nurses. Firstly, respect. Thank you very much for your presentation today. Question is really back to community. We've got 25,000 mental health nurses in the country, and 1.4% of them identify as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and the population of about 3% being right across Australia. So the question is, do we need to go back to community to encourage people to become, say, mental health nurses, or do we need to train all mental health nurses in more cultural sensitivity? What do you see as being the solution in that space, or is it a hybrid?
Yeah, there's a few things in there, but like I said, it's always good to have workforce initiatives supporting what's going on. I'm a big believer that we do grow our own because, like I said, we are competing with a lot of different industries out there. The other thing, as I mentioned, like I said, Aboriginal people only make up 3% of the population, but 97% of the work is going to be done by everyone in this room today, and that's the challenge. It's not for me as an Aboriginal person to try and fix every Aboriginal issue in mental health because I'll end up finding something else to do. But the reality is that everyone in this room here today has a responsibility, and that's the challenge. If you can take it up as yourself, as a responsible person, and say, if I'm actually going to make a difference in Aboriginal mental health, I've got to lead the work. So you as an organisation are going to be responsible for how you deliver services, but how you support the community, because all of our funding agreements have KPIs in there around Aboriginal mental health at some point. Same thing around workforce development. If we haven't built a workforce or developing a workforce, it's why did we build capacity in our communities? To support yourselves, but also yourselves as an organisation. That comes with cultural supervision, comes from mentoring, comes from engaging with other networks out there, but also using our Aboriginal peer workers, as we mentioned, using those with lived experience. I'm sitting up here as a bureaucrat talking about it. So the idea is that we've got plenty of mechanisms and supports in place already to support what's going on. So I think if you take it to a local level, they'll tell you exactly what they want and what they need. So like I said, it's good to sit in these rooms, talk about a lot of things, but unless you're in the community, talking to the community, it's very hard to get a policy lens on what needs to occur at that level. Because Aboriginal people have been told what to do for 255 years in Australia. So if you want to find out what to do, go and speak to them, go and spend the day out in the community. They'll tell you straight away, as someone mentioned earlier, about going out to a community, and yes, earlier, and then went back with 2 Aboriginal people, and there's a whole different experience. So if you're not going to put yourself out there, be uncomfortable, then you'll probably come back in 12 months and talk about the same challenges. I said, be vulnerable in this scenario. Go out and speak to the community, because they'll tell you exactly what they need. So, thanks.
Thanks, Matt, for the presentation earlier. My name's Mitch. I'm a proud Mudawari man from Gadooga. Currently work in Dubbo in the community mental health team. Just want to add on to that question earlier. That was a great response, but I think improving our Aboriginal mental health workforce, the program with CSU, the Jurawang program, how we invest into our Aboriginal mental health workers, but then there's no guarantee into the workforce, into health. Is there anything that's going to be stable from that in the future?
I'd like to say yes. It's something that, like I said, any workforce opportunity when it comes to Aboriginal mental health in such a need is something that you're always going to invest in. I'm a graduate of that program. I done it in 2000, I can't even remember now, 2009, 10. But it's a pathway. Like I said, it's not to say that you're guaranteed to go into a position. I think opportunities will always come when it comes to Aboriginal mental health workforce because it's such a skilled and unique industry to be in. So if you are prepared to put in the hard yards, I said the thing about our Aboriginal mental health workforce, they carry a huge cultural load. I imagine you're from that community, so you work in that community. I've done the same thing when I worked in Narrabri. I lived there. I used to have people turning up on my doorstep. I lived 25 k's out of town because I was desperate. So you always have that cultural load, and that's something that we need to understand here today is our Aboriginal staff are going to be burnt out. That's why I ran to Sydney of all places. Who moves from a rural country area to Sydney to get away from the community because of the challenges? Like I said, I used to have people turn up on my doorstep, desperate. They had no other way of going about things. So that's what expectations are on Aboriginal people. So I think for yourself, it's also having those supports in place, but it's also around the service that you're working in as well, having the good systems that support you, because as I said, it is a big cultural load that all of us go through every day. That's why I left Justice Health. It was too much for me. I loved the job, but it was just too challenging because I didn't have the right systems around to support me because of that cultural load and expectation. So if you do need, please reach out. I'm happy to support anyone. As I said, it's around having the right systems in places and support you as well, the organisation you're at.
Thanks, Matthew. We've got time for just one more.
Beautiful presentation, Matt. As a chronically white woman, I felt much kinship with the differences in expression of distress. And I can only tell you that I understand it simply because I'm autistic. And being autistic means that my mental health expression isn't always what it looks like. I was classed as aggressive because I made a fist. And before I was diagnosed as autistic, I had to have a borderline personality disorder diagnosis so that they understood me, which is ludicrous. But I can see where those challenges would be for someone who has a very different mental health expression or health expression, to be honest, or life expression. So I really thank you for that because it sort of brought it home to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think we've run out of time. And look, I just want to thank Matthew very much. I think it's been a fantastic presentation. You have to get a present, yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, it's probably not drugs or alcohol, so you can... It's all good. Thank you very much. I think a big round for Matthew. Thank you very much.